The shells arrived from nowhere. February 16, 1944. Truk Atoll, a Japanese destroyer captain, stood frozen at his optical rangefinder, watching two massive silhouettes materialize on the distant horizon. 20 miles away, perhaps more. The morning sun painted them in shades of gray against an even grayer sky. Then the thunder came. The American battleships opened fire from 35,700 yards. The shells screamed through the air with a sound like tearing fabric, like the sky itself was being ripped apart. They landed so close that saltwater spray drenched his entire crew. Men shouted. Rangefinder operators reported frantically, their voices cracking with disbelief. The enemy was hitting near them from beyond visual range. From a distance, where Japanese optics could barely resolve the target ships, where their own guns would be firing completely blind. The Americans were placing 2,700-pound shells with terrifying precision. In that single moment, everything these Japanese crews had trained for their entire careers began to crumble. They had spent decades perfecting optical gunnery, training their eyes to measure distances across the waves, calculating firing solutions by hand with mathematical precision. And now an invisible enemy was raining destruction upon them from over the horizon. But this moment did not begin on February 16, 1944. It began 6 years earlier in a cramped office in Washington, D.C., with a man everyone called a dreamer. March 1938. Robert Marshall sat alone in his office at the Naval Research Laboratory, watching the Potomac River through a window that had not been cleaned in months. He was 43 years old. His temples had gone prematurely gray. He had a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses every few minutes, pushing them up the bridge of his nose, even when they had not slipped. He carried blueprint tubes everywhere he went. For 5 years, Marshall had been pitching the same idea to the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. 5 years of presentations. 5 years of detailed technical proposals. 5 years of watching admirals nod politely, ask a few perfunctory questions, then explain that American naval gunnery was already excellent. Human operators with quality optical equipment had proven effective for decades, they said. Why invest millions in unproven electronic systems when traditional methods work perfectly well? That afternoon, Marshall had endured his most humiliating rejection yet. The conference room at the Bureau had been filled with senior officers. Admiral William Thornton, the Navy's senior gunnery officer, sat at the head of the table. 58 years old, distinguished career. Traditional mindset forged in the crucible of the Great War. Marshall had explained his concept. A system that could detect enemy ships using radio waves bounced off their hulls. A system that could calculate firing solutions, automatically accounting for target speed, bearing wind temperature, even the rotation of the Earth. A system that could direct 9 16-inch guns to hit a moving target from beyond the visible horizon, in complete darkness if necessary. The room had been silent when he finished. Then Admiral Thornton had smiled. "Mr. Marshall," he had said, his voice carrying the particular condescension that only senior military officers can truly master. "American naval gunnery is already excellent. We have the finest optical rangefinders in the world. Our crews are superbly trained. Why would we waste millions of taxpayer dollars on science fiction?" The other admirals had chuckled. Thornton had leaned forward. "Perhaps you should write novels instead of engineering proposals." The laughter had been louder then. Marshall had gathered his blueprints, walked out of the conference room with as much dignity as he could summon, made it to the street before his hands started shaking. Now, hours later, he sat by the river, questioning everything, questioning whether he was wasting his life chasing an impossible dream, questioning whether the admirals were right, whether he was a visionary or simply a fool who could not distinguish between the two. The sun was setting over the Potomac when Dr. James Chen found him. Chen was 35 years old, a physicist at the Naval Research Laboratory, Chinese-American in an era when that made every day a small battle. He faced discrimination from colleagues who questioned his loyalty, his competence, his right to be there at all. He and Marshall understood each other. "They laughed at Robert Goddard's rockets too," Chen said quietly, sitting down on the bench beside Marshall. Marshall did not look up. "Come with me," Chen continued. "I want to show you something." 20 minutes later, they stood in Chen's laboratory. The equipment looked crude, wires everywhere, vacuum tubes glowing faintly in the dim room, a cathode ray oscilloscope displaying a fuzzy green line. "We can detect ships," Chen said, 12 miles out, maybe more with better equipment. Marshall stepped closer to the oscilloscope. Radio waves, Chen explained. They bounce off metal, travel at the speed of light. We can measure the time delay, calculate distance with precision that exceeds any optical system ever built. Marshall's hands stopped shaking. Then we can shoot with radio waves, he said softly. Chen smiled. Exactly. They worked through the night, Marshall sketching integration diagrams, Chen calculating signal propagation times. By dawn, they had the outline of something revolutionary, a system where radar detection fed directly into an analog computer, where firing solutions were calculated in near real time, where guns tracked targets automatically without manual adjustment, where human limitations were removed from the equation entirely. Marshall walked home as the sun rose over Washington. For the first time in months, he felt something that resembled hope. The apartment in Georgetown was small. Catherine Marshall was already awake, preparing for her day of teaching mathematics at a local high school. She was 38 years old. They had been engaged for 2 years. Kate supported them both on her teaching salary and the extra money she made tutoring students in the evenings. Marshall's Navy salary barely covered his research expenses. She looked up when he entered. "You have that look," she said. "What look?" "The look you get when you think you have figured something out." Marshall set down his blueprint tubes, collapsed into a chair. "I met with Admiral Thornton yesterday." Kate's expression tightened. "He laughed at me," Marshall continued, "told me to write novels." "Rob, but Chen showed me something last night, his radar prototype. Kate, it works. We can see ships from 12 miles away, through fog, through darkness, through anything." Kate poured him coffee. "You have been chasing this for 5 years," she said carefully. "I know. I believe in you. I do. But I need to know you believe in us too." Marshall looked at her, really looked at her, saw the exhaustion around her eyes, the weight of supporting them both, the postponed wedding, the life they kept promising they would start. Soon. After the next proposal. After the next breakthrough. 6 months, he said. "Give me 6 months to make this work. If I cannot convince them by then, I will take a teaching position. We will get married. Have the life you deserve." Kate was quiet for a long moment. 6 months, she finally agreed. Marshall meant every word when he said it, but he did not know then how the war would change everything. How years would pass before he could truly keep that promise. 3 weeks later, an unexpected letter arrived at the Naval Research Laboratory. Rear Admiral Thomas Garrett requested a meeting. Marshall almost threw the letter away. Another admiral, another rejection waiting to happen. But Chen convinced him to go. Garrett was 50 years old. He served on the Navy Modernization Board. He had lost a destroyer to a night attack in the First World War. He understood the value of seeing in darkness. They met in a small office, not a formal conference room. "I read your proposal," Garrett said without preamble. "Thornton thinks you are crazy." Marshall's heart sank. "But I think you might be right." Marshall looked up. "I can arrange a demonstration," Garrett continued. "Dahlgren Proving Ground in Virginia. You will have one chance, one shot to prove this works. If you succeed, I will fight for funding. If you fail, Thornton will bury this program so deep it will never see daylight again." Marshall's throat was dry. When he managed, 3 months. Can you be ready? Marshall thought about the crude prototype in Chen's lab, thought about what they would need to build, thought about the timeline. Yes, he said. It was possibly the most dishonest thing he had ever said in his life. 3 months became a crucible. Marshall assembled a team. Chen was the first. Then Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an electrical engineer who was fighting her own battles as the first woman in her department. She was 29 years old. Brilliant, fierce. She solved the integration problem that had been plaguing Marshall for months. How to feed radar data directly into a computer fast enough to be useful. Rodriguez worked it out in 3 days. Then there was Isaac Cohen, a Jewish refugee from Germany. Electronics genius. 38 years old. He had fled Berlin in 1936 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a head full of circuit designs that would eventually revolutionize fire control computing. They worked 18-hour days. The prototype grew, refrigerator-sized analog computer, radar antenna mounted on a fixed platform, 60 miles of cabling connecting everything. Vacuum tubes by the hundreds. Marshall missed dinners, missed Kate's birthday, missed her parents' visit from Philadelphia. He found a letter one morning slipped under the lab door. "I will not compete with blueprints for your attention," Kate had written. "But I will not give up on us either. Just come home sometimes. Remember that I exist." Marshall read the letter at 3 in the morning, meant to go home, meant to apologize. Instead, he kept working. The demonstration was 6 weeks away, then 4, then 2. The system was not ready. September 12, 1938, Dahlgren Proving Ground, Virginia. Perfect weather, 10 knots of wind, clear visibility stretching for miles. The decommissioned destroyer USS Barton had been towed 5 miles offshore. She would serve as the target. Automated controls would maneuver her at 10 knots, simulating a real engagement. Admiral Thornton arrived with 6 other senior officers. They set up chairs on the observation deck like they were attending a particularly boring lecture. Garrett stood with Marshall and the team. "One shot," he whispered. Marshall's hands were shaking again. Rodriguez noticed, put her hand on his shoulder. "We built it right," she said quietly. "Trust the work." The target was at 12,000 yards. Marshall gave the order. Chen activated the radar. The green line on the oscilloscope jumped, painting the destroyer's position. The analog computer hummed to life. Gears turning, relays clicking. Calculating windage, target motion, ballistic coefficients. 8 seconds, the 5-inch gun elevated to its firing angle. Marshall held his breath. The gun fired. The shell arced through the morning sky, landed 50 yards from the moving target. On the first shot, the optical rangefinder team, using conventional methods, required 3 ranging shots to achieve similar accuracy. Marshall saw Thornton lean over to another admiral, saw him shrug. The admiral's expression said it clearly. Impressive, but optical methods work fine in good weather. Marshall's heart was pounding. This was not enough. He had proven the concept worked, but he had not proven why it mattered. He looked at Garrett, saw the same calculation happening behind the admiral's eyes. "Admiral Thornton," Marshall called out, his voice shaking slightly, "may we demonstrate one more scenario?" Thornton waved a hand dismissively. Marshall turned to the range crew. "Deploy smoke screen around the target." It took 10 minutes. The destroyer Barton disappeared behind a wall of artificial fog. Visibility dropped to near zero. The optical team packed up their rangefinders. Useless. They could see nothing but gray haze. Thornton was leaning forward now. Marshall gave the signal. Chen's radar was still painting the target. The electromagnetic waves passed through smoke as easily as through clear air. The computer calculated a new firing solution. Rodriguez was watching the gun director. Chen was monitoring the radar scope. Cohen had his hand on the computer housing, feeling the mechanical calculations happening inside. The gun fired. The shell disappeared into the smoke. For a moment, nothing. Just silence. Just waiting. Then the splash. Visible even through the haze. 30 yards from the invisible target. The observation deck was silent. Marshall turned to look at the admirals. Thornton's face had gone pale. Another admiral was writing frantically in a small notebook. Garrett was smiling. That night, Thornton wrote in his personal diary. Years later, his grandson would publish it. "I felt like I had witnessed a magic trick," the entry read, except it was not magic. It was mathematics and physics applied with revolutionary precision. "I have been wrong about many things in my career. I pray this is not one of them." 3 weeks later, the Navy authorized a crash development program. The Mark 38 fire control radar. The Mark 8 rangekeeper computer. Marshall was given a team of 50 engineers and a budget that would eventually exceed $40 million. Admiral Thornton attached one condition. "You have until the Iowa-class battleship's launch," he said. "Miss that deadline and optical systems go in instead." Marshall had 5 years to turn a prototype into a battle-ready system. The work nearly killed him. Recruiting was the first challenge. Marshall needed brilliant misfits, people who could think beyond conventional solutions. Rodriguez recruited more women engineers, facing resistance at every step. Chen brought in Chinese-American mathematicians who were being turned away from other defense projects. Cohen became the team's conscience. He had lost family in Europe. Every day brought news that made the work more urgent. "We are not building a weapon," he would say. "We are building a shield." Marshall was not sure he believed that, but he appreciated the sentiment. Bureaucratic sabotage came from unexpected places. Equipment requisitions mysteriously delayed. Prototype components arriving damaged. Thornton's allies in the Bureau making life difficult in 1,000 small ways. Marshall learned to navigate military politics, learned when to push, when to compromise, when to go around obstacles instead of through them. But the personal cost kept mounting. Kate and Marshall finally married in March 1940. Small ceremony. Marshall was distracted throughout. The honeymoon was postponed, just until after the Iowa installation he promised. In June 1941, Kate told him she was pregnant. Marshall missed the first 3 doctor appointments. December 7th, 1941. Marshall was in the lab when he heard the news on the radio. Pearl Harbor, thousands dead, the Pacific Fleet crippled. Chen's brother was stationed at Wake Island. 2 weeks later, they received word. Killed in action. Rodriguez's fiancée was in the Philippines. After Manila fell, there was only silence. The war was not theoretical anymore. Marshall started having nightmares, ships burning, boys drowning, all because his system was not ready, all because he was not working fast enough. Kate found him at his desk one morning, still awake from the night before. "You cannot save everyone," she said gently. "I can try, though. Not if you work yourself to death." But Marshall could not stop. The weight of it was crushing. Every delay meant more American sailors dying in battles they could have won, should have won, if only his system had been ready. February 1943. The first operational Mark 38 gunfire control system was installed on USS Iowa. 60 miles of cabling, 32 tons of electronic equipment, 2 complete and independent systems forward and aft. Marshall supervised the installation personally. He had not been home in 6 weeks. A telegram arrived on February 19th. "Baby girl born this morning. We named her Hope. Come home. Kate." Marshall read the telegram in Iowa's fire control room. Blueprint in one hand, telegram in the other, tears falling onto both. Chen found him there. "Go to them," Chen said. "We can finish this." Marshall looked at the half-installed system, looked at the telegram. "Not until she is ready," he said quietly. "Hope deserves a father who finished what he started." Chen did not argue. The installation took 3 more weeks. Sea trials in March. The system worked perfectly at 30,000 yards. Hit targets the crew could barely see with optical rangefinders. But the crew was skeptical. Lieutenant Commander Jack Sullivan, the fire control officer, voiced what many were thinking. "What happens when your fancy electronics fail? We will be defenseless." "Optical backup on every system," Marshall assured him. "But you will not need it." Sullivan did not look convinced. In November 1943, Iowa received deployment orders. Pacific Theater. Marshall requested permission to sail with the ship for her first combat mission. Permission denied. Too valuable to risk. He stood on the dock at Norfolk watching Iowa steam toward the horizon, watching his work sail away to war without him. Then he went home, met his daughter for the first time. Hope was 9 months old, dark hair, eyes that looked like his. Kate was exhausted, grateful, quietly furious. "She has your eyes," Kate said. "I hope she got my patience." Marshall held his daughter, felt her tiny weight in his arms, felt the crushing guilt of having missed so much. "I am sorry," he whispered. Kate touched his face. "I know." 6,000 miles away at Kure Naval Base in Japan, Vice Admiral Takeshi Yamada stood on the bridge of the super battleship Shinano. 52 years old, career officer, believer in the Kantai-Kessen doctrine, the decisive battle strategy that had guided Japanese naval planning for 4 decades. Yamada watched his crew training on the massive 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever mounted on any warship. Each shell weighed 3,220 pounds, could travel 26 miles. These guns would win the war, Yamada believed. American industrial quantity could not defeat Japanese quality. Superior training, superior optics, superior spirit. Intelligence reports had been arriving for months. Disturbing reports about American ships with unusual capabilities. Ships that could fire accurately in darkness. Ships that hit targets from ranges where Japanese optical systems were effectively blind. Yamada dismissed the reports. "Defeated men make excuses," he told his staff. But alone in his cabin at night, he reviewed the reports again, read them carefully, felt the first small seeds of doubt taking root. How were the Americans doing this? He pushed the question away, focused on training his crew, preparing for the decisive battle that would determine the war. The battle that Japanese doctrine promised would come. The battle where superior seamanship and crew excellence would overcome American material advantages. That battle was coming, Yamada was certain. What he did not know, could not know, was that the battle had already been decided. In a laboratory in Washington, D.C., by a man named Robert Marshall, by a team of engineers who had turned the impossible into the inevitable, by a system that could see through darkness, by guns that could hit targets over the horizon, by technology that had made 4 decades of Japanese naval doctrine obsolete overnight. The thunder was coming, invisible thunder. And when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same. January 30th, 1944. Kwajalein Atoll, 4:30 in the morning. Darkness so complete that a man standing on the deck of USS Iowa could not see his hand in front of his face. Lieutenant Commander Jack Sullivan stood in the fire control room, staring at the glowing green radar scope. He had been skeptical of Marshall's system. He still was, if he was honest. A career officer trusted his eyes, trusted optical rangefinders, trusted methods that had worked for generations. But this morning he could not see anything. The pre-invasion bombardment was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Japanese gun emplacements dotted the island, coordinates plotted from aerial reconnaissance. In normal doctrine, they would wait for daylight, wait for clear conditions, wait until human eyes could verify the targets. Sullivan looked at the radar scope again. It was painting the island clearly, every feature, every defensive position. "Fire control ready, sir," his assistant reported. Sullivan took a breath. "Commence firing." The 16-inch guns elevated to their assigned angles. 9 shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds. They arced through the pre-dawn darkness with a sound like rolling thunder. Sullivan counted seconds, waited for the observers' reports. The shells landed exactly where they were supposed to land. Japanese gun emplacements destroyed, bunkers collapsed, defensive positions obliterated, before the defenders could even man their weapons. Sullivan stared at the radar scope, at the system that had just allowed him to fight in conditions that should have been impossible. "My God," he whispered, "it actually works." 3,000 miles away in Washington, Robert Marshall received the coded combat report at 3 in the morning. Kate found him at his desk in the study. He was crying. "Rob." He looked up, handed her the decoded message. Iowa's first combat engagement. Mark 38 system performed flawlessly. 0 American casualties. Target destruction, 100%. "You saved them," Kate said softly. Marshall shook his head. "They saved themselves. I just gave them better eyes." But he could not stop crying. Not from joy, from relief so profound it felt like drowning, relief that his system had not failed, that American boys had not died because of some flaw he had missed, some calculation he had gotten wrong. The weight of it was crushing. Kate held him while he wept. At Kure Naval Base, Vice Admiral Yamada read the intelligence reports with growing unease. American ships had bombarded Kwajalein in complete darkness, achieved accurate fire without visual reference to targets, destroyed prepared defensive positions before Japanese forces could respond effectively. Yamada dismissed the report to his staff. "Exaggeration," he said. "Defeated commanders making excuses for poor preparation." But alone in his cabin, he read the report again. How were they doing this? The question would not leave him alone. February 16th, 1944. Operation Hailstone. American carrier aircraft pounded Truk Atoll, Japan's primary forward naval base in the Central Pacific. The anchorage burned. Ships scattered trying to escape the maelstrom. Several Japanese vessels attempted to flee northward under cover of the chaos. USS Iowa and USS New Jersey detached from the carrier screen to conduct an anti-shipping sweep. Dawn was breaking. Gray sky. Gray sea, visibility poor. At 9:36 in the morning, radar operators acquired contacts at 36,000 yards, more than 20 miles away. The gun directors swiveled automatically. Fire control radars locked onto the fleeing ships. The Mark 8 rangekeepers began their mechanical ballet, calculating wind speed, air temperature, target bearing and range rate, ballistic coefficients for the 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells. Both battleships opened fire. The shells climbed to apexes several miles high, then plunged downward toward targets the gun crews had never visually seen. Aboard the Japanese destroyer Milwaukee, the first salvo landed close enough to drench the entire ship in spray. The captain ordered evasive maneuvers, full speed, desperate zigzagging to throw off American targeting. It made no difference. The fire control systems were tracking not just current position, but rate of change. Every turn Milwaukee made was calculated into the firing solution. The radar painted a continuous picture. The range keepers adjusted. The guns elevated and traversed automatically. Iowa and New Jersey achieved what naval historians would later call the longest range straddle in history, 35,700 yards, nearly 20 miles. From a distance where Japanese optical systems would have been effectively blind, American battleships were placing shells with terrifying precision. The light cruiser Katori was not as fortunate as Milwaukee. American shells found her within minutes. Hit after hit, 16-inch armor-piercing rounds ripping through her relatively thin armor plating, tearing her apart from the inside. She was doomed before her crew understood what was happening. A Japanese sailor pulled from the water hours later would tell his interrogators something that would circulate through Imperial Navy intelligence for months. "We never saw the American ships, just death falling from the sky." Marshall read the battle report in his office at the Naval Research Laboratory. Enemy casualties estimated at 400 plus. Katori sunk. 2 destroyers damaged. Multiple shore installations destroyed. American losses, 0. Chen found him staring at the casualty figures. "You do not look happy," Chen observed. Marshall gestured at the report. "I wanted to save American lives," he said quietly. "I did, but I am still sending Japanese boys to the bottom of the ocean. Would you prefer it the other way around?" "I prefer neither." Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "The system performed perfectly," she said. "We won." Marshall looked at her. "Did we?" He could not articulate the feeling. The burden of knowing that his genius had created something that killed with such efficiency, that his work had made it possible to destroy ships from distances so great that the men firing the guns never saw the men they were killing. War without witnesses, death delivered by mathematics. Kate visited the lab that evening, found him still at his desk. "You did your part," she said. "You protected our boys." "At what cost to theirs?" Kate was quiet for a moment. "That is not a question you can answer," she finally said. "That is a question for generals and presidents. You are an engineer. You built a tool. How they use it is not your responsibility." Marshall wanted to believe her, but the weight remained. October 23, 1944. The largest naval battle in history was assembling. Vice Admiral Yamada stood on the bridge of Shinano watching his fleet form up in the Sibuyan Sea, the most powerful concentration of surface firepower Japan had ever assembled. Shinano, 72,000 tons fully loaded. Sister ship to Yamato and Musashi, the 3 largest battleships ever built, 10 heavy cruisers, 15 destroyers, enough firepower to devastate any surface fleet in existence. The mission was simple in its desperation. Transit the Sibuyan Sea, pass through San Bernardino Strait under cover of darkness, fall upon the American landing fleet at Leyte Gulf at dawn, slaughter the vulnerable transports, cut off American ground forces from reinforcement, force the invasion to collapse. The decisive battle, the Kantai Kessen, everything Japanese naval doctrine had promised for 40 years. Yamada had trained for this moment his entire career, but intelligence reports kept arriving. Reports about American battleships with unusual capabilities, ships that could hit targets in complete darkness, ships that fired accurately from ranges where Japanese optical systems were useless. One report from a surviving destroyer captain at Truk described it as fighting against gods who could see through the night itself. Yamada dismissed such reports as exaggeration born of defeat. Japanese rangefinders were the finest in the world. Japanese crews were the best trained. Superior technology and fighting spirit would prevail. They had to prevail. There was no alternative. October 24th. Center Force entered the Sibuyan Sea. American reconnaissance aircraft had already spotted them. The first wave of carrier aircraft appeared at 10:26 in the morning. dive bombers and torpedo bombers, dozens of them, attacking with coordinated precision that Japanese anti-aircraft crews had never experienced. Musashi became the primary target. American pilots recognized her enormous size, correctly identified her as the most dangerous ship in the formation. They attacked with everything they had. The initial strikes scored 3 bomb hits and 1 torpedo hit. Damage was significant but manageable. Musashi maintained speed, continued toward the strait, but the Americans were not finished. Wave after wave followed. At 12:03, a second massive strike arrived. More torpedoes slammed into Musashi's hull. More bombs penetrated her deck armor. By 1:30 in the afternoon, a third wave attacked, then a fourth. The scale of assault was unprecedented. Japanese anti-aircraft gunners fired until their barrels glowed red hot. The Type 96 25mm guns, manually aimed and hand-loaded, simply could not track the number of targets swarming around the ship. American pilots later reported that Japanese anti-aircraft fire was intense but surprisingly inaccurate. The guns lacked the proximity-fused shells that made American anti-aircraft batteries so deadly. They lacked the radar-directed fire control that could track multiple fast-moving aircraft simultaneously. By mid-afternoon, Musashi was doomed. She had absorbed at least 17 bomb hits and 19 torpedo hits. Her list increased until the ship could no longer be controlled. At 7:35 in the evening, she capsized and sank. 1,023 of her 2,399 crew members died with her. The second largest battleship ever built, armed with the most powerful guns ever mounted on any warship, destroyed without ever firing at an enemy surface vessel. Not by superior battleships in a gun duel, not in the decisive battle Japanese doctrine had promised for 4 decades. By aircraft, by a weapon system that Japanese naval conservatives had resisted fully integrating into their strategic thinking. Yamada watched Musashi sink from Shinano's bridge, watched her roll over, watched her disappear beneath the waves. For the first time in his career, he felt something cold settle in his chest. Fear. But he pressed on, through San Bernardino Strait, into the Philippine Sea, toward the American landing beaches in the decisive battle that would save Japan. October 25th, dawn. Center Force emerged from the strait and encountered an American naval formation off Samar Island. Yamada's heart surged. This was it, the moment, the decisive engagement. Then he saw what he was facing. Escort carriers, the smallest and slowest carriers in the American inventory. Their flight decks barely armored, protected by only a handful of destroyers and destroyer escorts. On paper, it should have been a massacre. Shinano's 18.1-inch guns against escort carriers designed to support amphibious operations. Japanese heavy cruisers with 8-inch guns against destroyers armed with 5-inch mounts. The American force was designated Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. Against them, Yamada commanded the most powerful surface force Japan had fielded since the war began. At 6:58 in the morning, Yamada ordered a general attack. Shinano opened fire with her massive main battery. Other Japanese battleships and cruisers joined in. Hundreds of shells were expended as the Japanese fleet pursued the fleeing American carriers. And yet something went terribly wrong. The escort carriers largely escaped. American destroyers, massively outgunned, launched desperate torpedo attacks that forced Japanese heavy ships to maneuver, breaking their pursuit. Smokescreens obscured visibility, but the truly shocking discovery came in the after-action analysis. The gunnery performance of Center Force was shockingly poor. Hit percentages fell far below what Japanese doctrine and training predicted. Shells fell short or went long or landed wide. Fire control seemed erratic. Target tracking was inconsistent. Part of this was the chaos of battle, the aggressive American defensive tactics, but a larger part was the inherent limitation of Japanese fire control systems when pushed beyond their design parameters, the manual input requirements, the lack of automated tracking, the reliance on optical range finding in conditions of smoke, rain squalls, and rapidly maneuvering targets. Meanwhile, American radar directed 5-inch guns on the destroyers achieved hit after hit on Japanese heavy cruisers. These small guns firing shells, a fraction of the weight of Yamada's projectiles, delivered accurate fire, while the American ships maneuvered at high speed, launched torpedoes, and laid smoke screens. The fire control systems automatically compensated for ship motion, target motion, and ballistic variables in real time. The heavy cruiser Chokai was disabled and later sank from damage inflicted by 5-inch fire from American escort carriers. A cruiser defeated by guns that weighed a fraction of what her own weapons did. But those American guns were guided by Mark 37 fire control directors with integrated radar. They did not need perfect visibility or stable firing platforms. They just worked. After 2 hours of confused action, Yamada made a decision that has puzzled historians ever since. He ordered Center Force to withdraw. His staff was confused. They had overwhelming advantage on paper. Why retreat? Yamada gave tactical reasons. Confusion about American force composition, fear of further air attacks, communications failures. But the truth he would not admit for years was something else. Somewhere beyond the horizon were the American fast battleships, the Iowa-class ships. With those systems, if they caught Center Force damaged and scattered, it would not be a battle. It would be an execution. Yamada withdrew through San Bernardino Strait. The mission failed. The Leyte invasion succeeded. The decisive battle that Japanese doctrine promised had ended not with overwhelming Japanese victory, but with retreat, with the growing realization that something fundamental had changed about naval warfare. Something Yamada did not understand. Something he could not fight. Marshall received the Leyte Gulf reports on October 26th. The battle was an American victory. Japanese naval aviation destroyed. Multiple carriers lost. Japan's ability to contest American dominance of the Philippine Sea strategically collapsed. His systems had performed perfectly. "We won," Chen said quietly. Marshall stared at the casualty lists. American casualties, Japanese casualties, thousands of names that would never go home. "Did we?" he asked again. Kate visited the lab that afternoon, found him in the same position. "You did your part," she said. "You protected our boys." "I know." "Then why do you look like you lost?" Marshall could not answer. November 1944. The reports started arriving from the Pacific Fleet. Mark 38 systems experiencing failures. Saltwater corrosion attacking electronic components. Vacuum tubes failing at rates far exceeding manufacturer specifications. Tropical humidity causing condensation inside sealed compartments. Shorting circuits. Degrading performance. USS Wisconsin reported intermittent radar failures during Iwo Jima bombardments. USS Missouri experienced similar issues at Okinawa. The electronic systems that had revolutionized naval gunnery were proving temperamental under sustained combat conditions. A particularly damning report came from Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, a fleet maintenance officer. "Systems too fragile for combat conditions," he wrote. "Recommend return to optical fire control primacy with radars backup only." The report landed on Admiral Thornton's desk. Thornton sent a memo to Navy brass. "I told you so" were not the exact words he used, but the sentiment was clear. Marshall's reputation was threatened. Worse, American sailors were going into combat with unreliable systems. Marshall erupted in a staff meeting. Chen had never seen him lose his temper before. "The solution is not abandoning the future," Marshall shouted. "The solution is better support." 72 hours later, Marshall had deployed specialized technician teams to every forward base in the Pacific, created an expedited supply chain for critical replacement parts, established field repair training programs so shipboard crews could handle basic maintenance. Rodriguez led the Pacific deployment team personally, spent 3 months traveling from ship to ship, fixing systems, training crews, improving reliability. But the crisis took its toll. Kate found Marshall collapsed at his desk one morning. He had not slept in 3 days. His doctor warned of cardiac risk, stress-induced heart palpitations, blood pressure dangerously elevated. "I will not raise hope alone because you worked yourself to death," Kate said. It was not a request. Marshall started delegating more to Chen and Rodriguez, started going home at night, started remembering that he had a family, started remembering that survival mattered more than perfection. The bombardments continued. Iwo Jima, February 1945. Before the Marines landed, Iowa-class battleships joined the pre-invasion bombardment. The 16-inch guns fired Mark 13 high-capacity shells. Each 900-pound projectile contained hundreds of pounds of high explosive. Upon impact, they created craters 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep. The blast could defoliate trees 400 yards from the impact point. Japanese defenders had prepared elaborate fortifications, concrete bunkers with walls several feet thick, artillery positions dug into volcanic rock, interconnected tunnels and firing positions designed to withstand conventional bombardment. What they had not anticipated was the sheer volume and accuracy of American naval gunfire. Day after day of bombardment, thousands of shells, not random suppressive fire, carefully plotted radar directed targeting of specific positions identified through aerial reconnaissance. A Japanese survivor described it later. The Earth itself was trying to kill us. The American battleships fired from ranges of 20,000 yards or more, well beyond the effective reach of most Japanese coastal artillery. When Japanese guns attempted to return fire, American ships simply repositioned. Their speed and maneuverability allowed them to shift firing positions faster than Japanese artillery could adjust. The radar fire control meant American ships maintained accurate fire even when obscured by their own gunsmoke. Japanese optical fire control required clear sight lines that no longer existed. April 6, 1945. At Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo, Yamada sat in a conference room with the Naval General Staff. The statistics were devastating. 60% of heavy combatants lost since October, not primarily to other surface ships. To aircraft and submarines operating with American technological support, fire control radar, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, integrated combat information centers that coordinated attacks with precision Japanese commanders could not match. Yamada finally spoke the truth he had been avoiding. Gentlemen, we must face reality. American fire control, radar proximity, fused shells, integrated command systems. We cannot match them. The room was silent. Admitting defeat was unthinkable. Operation 10 Go, someone finally said. Send Shinano to Okinawa. One-way mission. No fuel for return. Beach the ship. Use her 18.1-inch guns as shore batteries until destroyed. Not a plan for victory, a plan for honorable death. Yamada volunteered to command personally. If his doctrine had failed, he should die with it. That night he went home to his wife Akiko. I am sailing tomorrow, he said. I will not return. Akiko was silent for a long moment. Traditional, stoic, Navy wife for 30 years. You have always done your duty, she finally said. I am proud. Yamada gave his son the family katana. Do not follow my path, he said. Find new ways to serve Japan. The old ways have failed. April 7th, 200 miles north of Okinawa, American reconnaissance aircraft found Shinano's task force steaming south. The weather was overcast, rain squalls, visibility poor, conditions that should have favored the Japanese. It did not matter anymore. The first wave of American carrier aircraft attacked at 12:32 in the afternoon. Hellcat fighters swept ahead to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Helldiver dive bombers rolled in from altitude. Avenger torpedo bombers descended to wave top height. Shinano's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. The Type 96 25mm guns filled the sky with tracers. The larger Type 89 127mm guns added their weight, but the fire was uncoordinated. Manually aimed, manually loaded, against dozens of fast-moving aircraft attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The first torpedo struck Shinano's port side at 12:35. Then another. Bombs penetrated her deck, starting fires that spread through interior compartments. A second wave attacked at 1 o'clock. More torpedoes. American pilots had learned from Musashi. They concentrated their torpedo runs on the port side, inducing a list that could not be corrected. Damage control teams flooded starboard compartments to counter the list. It helped temporarily. Then a third wave arrived. The attacks were relentless, coordinated, overwhelming. Yamada ordered counter-flooding of additional compartments. The ship slowed as flooding increased. Her list grew worse despite all efforts. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Shinano was taking water faster than damage control could pump it out. Her speed dropped to 18 knots, then 15, then 10. The fourth wave attacked at 2:02. More torpedoes, more bombs. The list reached 20 degrees. Crew members on the exposed deck could no longer maintain their footing. Ammunition hoists jammed. Gun turrets could not train properly. At 2:05, Yamada gave the order to abandon ship. But for many of the 3,332 crew members aboard, it was already too late. At 2:23 in the afternoon, Shinano's forward magazines exploded. The detonation was visible from 160 kilometers away. A mushroom cloud rose over 6 kilometers into the sky. The blast was detected on seismographs as far as the Japanese home islands. The most powerful battleship ever built broke apart and sank in less than 2 hours of sustained air attack. Only 276 crew members survived. Vice Admiral Takeshi Yamada gave the order to abandon ship, intending to go down with her himself. Captain Aruga lashed himself to the compass binnacle. The Kantai Kessen, the decisive battle that would save Japan, had ended with the destruction of Japan's last super battleship without her ever engaging an enemy surface vessel in the gun duel she was built to win. In Washington, Marshall received the reports. Shinano sunk, estimated casualties over 3,000. American losses, 10 aircraft, 12 aviators. He read the numbers, read them again. Then he broke. Chen found him weeping at his desk. "We did not fire a shot," Marshall said through his tears. "The carriers did this. Your systems made it possible. I know. That is what I cannot live with. Every death in this war has my fingerprints on it." Kate arrived an hour later. Chen had called her. She held Marshall while he wept. Hope asked why Daddy was sad. Kate tried to explain. Some things children could not understand. Some burdens fathers had to carry alone. The thunder continued, invisible thunder. And with it, the weight of victory that felt like defeat. The knowledge that genius once unleashed could not be recalled. That innovation changed everything, even the souls of those who created it. July 14th, 1945. Night fell over the northern coast of Japan. Citizens of Muroran Hokkaido prepared for sleep. The war was clearly lost. Everyone knew it, but surrender was unthinkable. The fighting would continue until there was nothing left to fight with. At 11 o'clock, the air raid sirens did not sound. There were no aircraft overhead. Instead, the thunder came from the sea. USS Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin materialized out of the darkness. 16-inch guns elevated toward shore targets. The Mark 38 fire control systems painted industrial facilities with radar precision. The Nihon Steel Company, the Wanishi Iron Works. The guns opened fire. Shells weighing 2,700 pounds arced through the night sky, landed with devastating accuracy. Secondary fires spread through the industrial complex, through surrounding residential areas. By morning, 2,500 houses had burned. Japanese coastal batteries attempted to return fire. Their shells fell harmlessly into the ocean. The American ships were too fast, too maneuverable. Their radar-directed guns maintained accurate fire, even while repositioning to avoid counter-battery attempts. The psychological impact was devastating. American battleships were attacking Japan itself, the sacred homeland, and there was nothing Japanese forces could do to stop them. The Minister of War was forced to publicly apologize for the inability to defend against American naval attacks. 3 days later, the battleships returned. July 17th, Hitachi, only 80 nautical miles from Tokyo. Citizens in the capital could hear the distant thunder of the guns. A factory worker named Yuki Tanaka huddled in a shelter, listening to the bombardment. "They are in our front yard," she whispered. "Nothing can stop them." She was right. Nothing could. Marshall received photographs of the damage. Industrial centers obliterated, residential areas burned, civilian casualties mounting. He sat in his office at the Naval Research Laboratory staring at the images. Rodriguez found him there. "We are not fighting soldiers anymore," Marshall said quietly. "We are destroying their entire country." "They started this war," Rodriguez replied. "We are ending it." "Ending it, yes, but at what cost to our own souls?" Rodriguez had no answer for that. Neither did Marshall. August 15th, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over radio sets across Japan. The first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor speak. "We have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all the generations to come by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. Surrender." At the Naval Research Laboratory, Marshall listened to the broadcast with Chen and Rodriguez, the team that had worked together for 7 years. Chen's brother would never come home. Rodriguez's fiancée was returning from a POW camp 30 pounds lighter than when he had left. "We won," Chen said quietly. No one cheered, no one celebrated. The relief was too profound for celebration, too mixed with grief for joy. Marshall thought about the Japanese crews he had never met, the men his systems had helped kill, boys who had believed in their doctrine the way American boys believed in theirs. I am not sure anyone really wins these things, he said. September 2nd, Tokyo Bay. The surrender ceremony took place aboard USS Missouri. Marshall was not present. He had returned to the United States 6 months earlier, exhausted and ill. Instead, he watched newsreel footage in a Georgetown theater. Kate beside him, Hope on his lap. The little girl was 2.5 years old now. She did not understand what she was watching. Japanese officials walked across Missouri's deck, past the 16-inch gun turrets, the physical embodiment of American technological superiority. They signed the surrender documents. The war that had begun with Japanese confidence in decisive battle doctrine ended under the shadow of American battleships that had made that doctrine obsolete. Marshall watched the newsreel in silence, felt no triumph, only exhaustion. September 5th, 1945. Marshall collapsed at his desk. Kate found him unconscious, called an ambulance, rode with him to the hospital. The doctors diagnosed stress-induced cardiac episode. His heart was damaged, not critically but enough to matter. He was 50 years old. He looked 65. "You are killing yourself," the cardiologist said bluntly. "Complete rest. No work for 6 months minimum." Marshall tried to argue. Kate stopped him. "You did your part," she said. "Now rest." Hope visited him in the hospital, climbed carefully onto the bed. "Daddy needs to come home now," she said seriously. Marshall looked at his daughter, at Kate, at the life he had almost sacrificed completely on the altar of innovation. "Yes," he agreed. "Daddy needs to come home." October 1945. The Navy Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest honor the Navy could bestow on a civilian. The ceremony was small, Marshall still recovering. Kate helped him into his suit. The citation praised his revolutionary contributions to fire control technology, noted that his systems had been instrumental in countless naval engagements across the Pacific. Letters of commendation arrived from admirals, including one from Thornton. "I was wrong to doubt you," Thornton wrote. "Your persistence saved countless American lives. I am grateful you did not listen to me." Marshall kept that letter in his desk drawer for the rest of his life, but the public recognition was modest. The newspapers barely mentioned it. Unlike the scientists who developed the atomic bomb, Marshall remained unknown outside naval engineering circles. His fire control systems had no dramatic moment of revelation, no mushroom cloud, no single headline-worthy photograph. Their contribution was incremental, distributed across hundreds of engagements, impossible to capture in a single image. Marshall preferred it that way. "I did not do it for glory," he told Kate. He returned to work at the Naval Research Laboratory, part-time at first, then full-time as his health improved, refining fire control technology for the post-war Navy. The systems continued to evolve. Vacuum tubes began giving way to early solid-state electronics. Radar became more sophisticated. In March 1946, Marshall and Kate renewed their wedding vows. The ceremony they should have had in 1940. The honeymoon they had postponed for years. 2 weeks in the Smoky Mountains. No blueprints, no telegraph access, just Marshall and Kate and the space to remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. They returned to Bethesda, to their small house, to their daughter. In 1947, Robert Marshall Jr. was born. In 1949, Grace. Marshall had the family he had promised Kate, years late. But he had it. He went home at 6 o'clock every evening, had dinner with his children, read them stories, taught them mathematics, became the father he had not been able to be during the war. The work continued, but it no longer consumed him. He had learned finally that some things mattered more than innovation. April 12, 1952. Marshall was 57 years old now, his hair completely white. He moved more slowly. His heart occasionally reminded him of the damage he had done to it during the war, but he was content. His secretary knocked on his office door that morning. "Admiral Yamada to see you," she said. Marshall looked up confused. "I do not know any Admiral Yamada. He says it is important." A man entered the office, distinguished bearing, 59 years old, obviously Japanese, obviously uncomfortable being in this place. Mr. Marshall, the man said through an interpreter, we have never met, but you and I fought the same war from opposite sides. Marshall stood slowly. The man introduced himself. Rear Admiral Takeshi Yamada, formerly Vice Admiral Imperial Japanese Navy. Marshall's breath caught. Yamada, the commander of Center Force at Leyte Gulf, the man who had gone down with Shinano, except he had not. I am part of a Japanese naval delegation, Yamada continued through the interpreter, studying American military technology. The occupation has ended. Japan is rebuilding as your ally, but I have a personal reason for requesting this meeting. He paused. I want to understand the technology that defeated me. Marshall's mind reeled. The reports had said Yamada died with his ship, but clearly those reports had been wrong. Some miracle had saved him. Some twist of fate had pulled him from the water. Please, Marshall said, sit. For 3 hours, Marshall showed Yamada his work. The Mark 38 fire control system, the radar displays, the analog computers, the automated gun directors. He explained the design philosophy, how the system removed human limitations from the targeting process, how radar extended detection range beyond optical capability, how electronic computation accelerated solution calculation beyond human speed. Yamada listened intently, asked detailed technical questions, professional curiosity transcending the gulf of former enemies. Marshall found himself respecting the man, his intellect, his willingness to learn, his dignity in defeat. When the tutorial ended, Yamada sat silently for several minutes. Marshall waited. May I ask you something? Yamada finally said, speaking in halting English, now without the interpreter. Of course. At Samar, why did I withdraw? I had overwhelming advantage. I should have destroyed those carriers. But I retreated. This decision has haunted me for 7 years. Marshall was quiet for a moment. What do you think the answer is? He asked gently. Yamada's hands were shaking slightly. I finally understand now, he said. That morning I sensed something I could not name. My ships fired hundreds of shells. We should have massacred those small carriers. But something was wrong. The American destroyers, so much smaller than my cruisers, were hitting us with precision we could not match. Even in chaos, even in smoke. They hit us. He looked directly at Marshall. And I knew without understanding how that somewhere beyond the horizon were your Iowa-class ships, with systems I could not fight, with capabilities I could not counter. I withdrew because I felt the presence of the future, and I was commanding the past. The office was silent. Marshall felt tears on his face. I thought you died, he said quietly. The reports said you went down with Shinano. Yamada shook his head. I gave the order to abandon ship. I intended to go down with her. But my executive officer knocked me unconscious, put me on a life raft. When I woke, I was in a hospital ship. 300 crew members died that day because I failed them. You did not fail them. Your doctrine failed them. Your nation's leadership failed them. You were a good officer trapped in an impossible situation. Yamada looked at him. You are generous to say so, but I know the truth. And I know that your systems, your vision made our defeat inevitable. I do not blame you for this. I came here to understand, and now I do. He stood, extended his hand. Marshall stood as well, took the hand, former enemies. Meeting in the place where the technology that decided the outcome was still being refined. Your President Lincoln said something, Yamada continued, with malice toward none, with charity for all. Perhaps now we can build peace as powerfully as we fought war. Marshall nodded, unable to speak. After Yamada left, Marshall sat alone in his office for a long time. That evening he wrote in his personal journal, Today I made peace with the ghost that has haunted me since 1945. Yamada understands what happened to his Navy, his doctrine, his men. He bears no grudge. Perhaps I can finally forgive myself for being good at what I do. He showed the entry to Kate that night. You were always at war with yourself, she said gently. I am glad you finally found peace. The decades passed. The Korean War brought the Iowa-class battleships back from reserve. USS New Jersey bombarded North Korean positions with the same radar-directed precision that had revolutionized Pacific war gunnery. Marshall consulted on improvements. The vacuum tubes that had caused reliability problems were replaced by solid-state electronics. The technology continued to evolve. In Vietnam, the 16-inch guns spoke again. Shore bombardment missions that demonstrated the enduring value of Marshall's principles. Marshall retired from the Naval Research Laboratory in 1963, age 68. He and Kate moved to a smaller house in Bethesda, close to their children, close to their grandchildren. Hope became a mathematics professor. Robert Jr. became a Navy engineer. Grace became a historian. Kate passed away in 1976, 76 years old. They had been married 36 years. Marshall held her hand as she died, whispered, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for believing. Thank you for bringing him home when he had lost himself in the work." After her funeral, Marshall wrote long letters to old colleagues. Chen in Taiwan, Rodriguez at MIT, Cohen, whose electronics company had become a defense industry giant. Remembering, reflecting, making peace with a life spent building weapons that killed with ever greater efficiency. December 12, 1978. Robert Marshall passed away peacefully in his sleep, age 83. The Washington Post obituary was brief. Robert Marshall, naval engineer, died Tuesday. He contributed to fire control technology during World War II. Most readers did not recognize his name. The funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was small. Dr. James Chen traveled from Taiwan. Dr. Elena Rodriguez came from MIT. Isaac Cohen attended with his grandson. 50 former Navy crew members from Iowa-class battleships. Admiral Thornton's grandson representing the family. No sitting admirals, no press, just people whose lives Marshall had touched. Chen delivered the eulogy. Robert Marshall was called a dreamer. He dreamed of ships that could see in darkness. He dreamed of guns that could hit targets beyond the horizon. He dreamed of saving lives by taking away the advantage of surprise. And then he made those dreams real. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because he believed in the future more than he feared the present. They buried him with military honors, 21-gun salute, folded flag presented to Grace. But the story does not end there. Dr. Chen's grandson teaches physics in Taiwan using his grandfather's papers to show how radar technology evolved. At MIT, Rodriguez's protégés lead electronic warfare research. Cohen's company employs thousands developing precision weapons. Marshall's children scattered across America. Hope's daughter teaches mathematics at Princeton. Robert Jr.'s son serves on a guided missile destroyer. Grace wrote a book, The Invisible Thunder My Father's War. Small print run, academic audience. But it tells the story. In 1992, USS Missouri was decommissioned after 51 years of service. She became a museum ship in Pearl Harbor. Visitors walk past the 16-inch gun turrets, reading plaques about advanced fire control systems. The plaques do not mention Marshall's name. 2024, a young engineer tours USS Iowa Museum in Los Angeles with her daughter. On the bulkhead, a photograph. Marshall and his team. 1943. No names, just faces. She pauses, wonders about the man in the center, the exhaustion in his eyes, the determination. Then her daughter tugs her hand and they move on. But sometimes in quiet moments, someone discovers Grace's book, reads about the man who dreamed of ships that could see in darkness, the man who turned impossible into inevitable. And in the reading, Marshall lives again. In Japan, Takeshi Yamada lived quietly until 1977, age 84. He never publicly discussed his meeting with Marshall. But close friends said that after his visit to America, he seemed more at peace. His grandson, interviewed years later, said something profound. "My grandfather told me the war taught him that honor is not in dying for obsolete ideas. Honor is in learning from defeat." He said Robert Marshall showed him it was not cowardice to recognize when the world had changed. It was wisdom. Yamada kept a photograph of Marshall on his desk until his death. Two men who fought on opposite sides, who met as enemies, who parted as something more than friends, as witnesses to history, as participants in the transformation of warfare. The sun sets over the Pacific, the ocean where the invisible thunder once rolled, where ships fought battles that changed the world, where the future defeated the past, not with malice, but with mathematics. The battleships are museums now. The thunder is silent, but the legacy remains in every precision weapon system, in every technology that extends human capability beyond natural limitation. in every engineer who refuses to accept that impossible means anything more than not yet achieved. Robert Marshall proved that one person properly positioned, properly persistent, can change the course of history. Not through force, through innovation. Not through destruction, through creation. The invisible thunder, rolling across generations, changing everything it touches, forever.